Hi, YouTubers. I want to talk about something important. So, things that are offensive. So, you might be saying, what is offensive smoking essay? Like, what the hell is offensive smoking essay? And the answer is, I want to talk about one thing in particular that's offensive, and that's swear words or curse words. So, obviously, swear words can be offensive, like the F word, the word fuck, or cocksucker, or, twat, or pussy, or motherfucker, or bitch, or bastard. Obviously, fuck is offensive, to say, or motherfucker is very offensive to say, or bitch, or bastard. But I want to talk about right now, in particular, something that used to be very offensive, but nowadays is not so much offensive. And you might say to yourself, like, what the hell is that smoking essay? Like, what the fuck is that? And that is the words idiot, imbecile, and moron. And you might say to yourself, why are those even offensive? I mean, that's like name calling. Like you hear those on like Disney movies. Like, why would they even be considered offensive, smoking essay? And the answer is because many years ago, back in like the 50s and 60s, these were terms used to describe intellectually disabled people. So you've heard the phrase retarded. Obviously somebody's like mentally retarded, and that's a term that was used in the 50s and 60s for people who were disabled. They would call people with Down syndrome or people who are globally delayed, mentally retarded. And now the term is intellectual disabilities or developmental disabilities. That's why certain agencies have changed their name, et cetera, And the more proper term nowadays is not retarded, it's disabled or globally delayed for people, or Down syndrome. I have a friend who has Down syndrome myself. And I have high functioning autism Asperger's, which is considered a developmental disability, and I have a learning disability myself. So that's the more proper term these days. But back in the 50s and 60s, the fucking 50s and 60s, people would refer to it as being idiocy, imbecile, or moron or moronic. So that's why back then it was considered offensive. Or not so much offensive back then, but that's where the term came from, and that's why, even though nowadays people rarely use those words in that context nowadays, obviously the R word, it's still used in that context. You call somebody the R word or use the word retarded, obviously it's still in that context, it still means the same shit, as in bullshit is bullshit, as in, back in the day. But the words, idiot or like imbecile or moron are very rarely used in that context nowadays. But if you're wondering, people who, say like your grandmother or your grandfather, your uncle, nice big ass uncle like the big ass cigar, might say, oh, that's really offensive. You call that person, your friend, a moron, or you called your friend, an idiot. And you might be really confused. You might be like, why the hell is that offensive, And the reason is because in their generation, when they were growing up, that term moron or moronic referred to somebody who, basically the term was back then, like mentally retarded. So, and that's why it is offensive. Same thing as the word mongoloid or mong. It basically is a term for somebody who is severely intellectually delayed. So there would be different tiers of IQs for somebody's IQ back then. The most severe being idiocy, which is below 20, and somewhere in the middle would be an imbecile, and then in the highest would be moron or moronic. So that's why if you're wondering, if you ever are around like a older person, say somebody above the age of, I don't know, maybe above the age of 60, in their generation it was used in a very different sense. Nowadays you hear words like moron or idiot or imbecile or stupid all the time. I mean, you hear those on even Disney movies, like G-rated movies. And I actually made a video a while back in like March or February, saying like, why does YouTube, be so sensitive over the word like moron? I mean, like, in my generation, it was never used in a derogatory sense. It has not even close to meaning like retarded, It just meant like somebody who's a fool, somebody who's a goofball or whatever, somebody who's an idiot, But the reason why it's still potentially, quote unquote, potentially offensive is because, back in the 50s and 60s, it was a term for somebody with a low IQ. It was the same thing as saying somebody who's mentally retarded or somebody who is, potentially referred to as Down syndrome or mongoloid back then. And all those terms are horrible. So, I mean, I think nowadays, using the term like, idiot or moron or stupid or idiot is just name calling nowadays. In this generation present, 21st century, yeah, it's not really offensive that much. But, you have to consider 100 years ago, they would put people in asylums, they would put people in mental hospitals, state-run hospitals. I mean, in my town, there is a old state-run hospital, and they used to put people in those hospitals for potentially their whole life, and it was really horrible and unfair, and they would do all kinds of horrible shit to them. I mean, all kinds of fucking horrible shit. So that's why potentially the term idiot or idiocy or moron or moronic or any of those terms can be potentially used as offensive, even though in our generation, my generation, Gen Z, millennials, it's more of like a name-calling thing. It's not even close to like calling somebody a cocksucker or calling somebody a twat or calling somebody a bitch or a bastard or a fucktard or whatever. It's just more or less, or a dickhead. It's more just name-calling, but it had a very different, upbringing. So that's upbringing in the 50s and 60s or even earlier, like the 19th century, the 1800s, the early 1900s, it had a very different context. It was used for people who were back then considered to be mentally retarded. So, and that's why it's potentially offensive, especially to people who grew up in that generation. Of course, there aren't a whole lot of people who are alive who are in the early 1900s anymore. So, I'm talking more like the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, and 60s, that kind of shit, Anyway, pretty fucking cool. That's just my personal opinion. I just wanted to clarify that, why that might be potentially offensive to use the word moron or idiot or imbecile. So, anyway, bye.